All right, let's do this again. I recorded this review yesterday, but for some reason the audio quality ended up being pretty poor. And I had the audacity to say winter is finally over. Yeah, I jinxed it. We got some more snow today. But either way, the worst of winter seems to be over, which means it is sword review season. And this one, a lot of you have been waiting for quite a while. Basically since I did the cutting in fall where it really impressed. So let's get to it. This is the Albion Principe. One beast of a sword. Now, as imposing as it looks with its shape and sheer size, this sword is not as heavy as you may think. It weighs 1.78 kilograms, or just a hair under 4 pounds, which for a longsword is kind of upper weight range. I'm starting to really second guess my decision to record outside today. Anyway, together with how well balanced it is, this gives you a pretty agile, quick sword. So you can swing this without fatigue quite easily. You can do a number of techniques very quickly. You could even use it with one hand. Now, why would you want to? Considering that would sacrifice all the advantages that it gives you in terms of control and power. And it has quite a long handle. But on a historical battlefield, if you had to pick up a shield to use with it, you could. In a duel, if you had to grapple, you could, while still using it fairly effectively. And all of that agility does not come at the expense of cutting power. Far from it. In fact, this is easily the best cutting sword I have tried so far. Now, there are runner-ups, no doubt about it. There are others that come pretty damn close, but this is such a powerful cutter. And it may not look like it in terms of blade profile at first glance because of how much it tapers. You know, some people may look at this and be like, oh, this is more of a thrusting sword, right? Now, this is from the 15th century. This blade is based on a sword from the Arsenal of Alexandria, early 15th century. And that was at a time when armor was highly developed. So you needed something that is capable of delivering an effective thrust into the gaps of the armor. But in case you face less heavily armored opponents, it's still good to have an effective cut. It has a flattened diamond cross-section. You can probably see the central ridge there. And because of the width of the blade, you have a lot of space for a gradual taper. And the more gradual that transition is from the center of the blade toward the edge, the less resistance it encounters when cutting into or through a target. It's still fairly wide, even at the top here. With this kind of blade, you would the ideal point of impact is a bit lower than with some other swords. If you have a sword that's fairly broad throughout, you can land effectively fairly far up. This one is better further down the blade, but either way, it's pretty devastating to whatever it hits. This is a really nice blade geometry. It's very thin, as you can see, and that thickness, along with the very gradual taper and also with the smooth transition, I can really barely see that micro bevel at the end that forms the edge. And that makes for amazing cutting performance. And also, it means that this will last long without needing extensive resharpening. Like, you may have to touch up the edge a little bit, like you may have to basically straighten it out again, hone it, or do some minor touch-up work. But you won't have to regrind the entire thing. This one here I had to do nothing with. Out of the box, it cuts like a monster. Talking a bit more about the shape here. The crossguard, I've seen pretty much exactly this crossguard on a sword in the Wallace collection. So I'm assuming that's what it's based on. It's the same kind of shape with the rounded colon ends and this decorative centerpiece here. And usually with this type of blade, which is an Oakshot Type 18C, you typically find a wheel pommel. This one has a scent stopper pommel, which I personally very much appreciate because I think this is way more effective to grip if you want to. You know, this has a pretty long grip, but even so, if I was wearing gauntlets with this, I may have to at least partially grip the pommel. Also, it's a way of using a longer lever. So you can use this for additional power, space it out, all of that. So very well shaped. I've already talked about the handling. It's fantastic. In short, it is very agile. It feels extremely lively in the hand. There's just one particular issue that I have with it, and that's the shape of the grip. Now, there's nothing horribly wrong with it. It's just, for personal preference, it's a little too rounded for me. Now, the grip is still wider than it is tall or thick, however you want to look at it. So that does allow you to feel the edge alignment, but the sides here are pretty strongly rounded. I would prefer if there were somewhat harder corners, so it would be less slippery in the hand. It does give you a positive grip with all these ridges here. It's kind of ribbed for her pleasure. Anyway, so that's good, but with how rounded it is, it still feels like it wants to turn in your hand a little bit. Not too much. Again, it is easy enough to maintain edge alignment with this, but most of my other swords feel like they give you a somewhat more positive grip because they're just a little more defined on those corners here. That may just be nitpick / personal preference. Not everybody may feel about it that way, the way I do. Also, I think this is probably one for larger hands. Like I have kind of medium, maybe small-ish medium hands, and my fingers can't fully wrap around this grip. So if you have larger hands, you will appreciate this. This will probably feel better in your hands than a lot of other swords. And again, you have that length too, so you can fit even gloved hands there comfortably. If you've seen my other Albion sword reviews, I don't have to say much about the fit and finish. It's the usual standard of quality. It's flawless, in one word. The crossguard is as tightly fitted as you can normally expect. There's really no gap. The pommel is very securely fitted, and even after hard abusive testing, it's 100% solid and tight. Nothing has loosened up, no sound or rattling or anything like that. I did my usual abusive testing in the sense of usual for Albion swords. I go way harder on them because I know what to expect. I know they can handle it. I've done it a number of times, and I'm pretty merciless with them generally. And that's also what happened again here. So I was hacking into wood, and this is abusive, even though I've myself made the point that cutting into wood isn't that big of a deal, considering that historically swords would clash against other swords and helmets and armor and shields, etc., and cut through bone, all of that. So it would have to be sturdy. But this is still worse in a lot of ways. If the branch or log even is too large in diameter, basically, if you can't cut through it in one swing, there's always the risk that it gets stuck if you throw the edge alignment off. This is completely user error, but it can easily happen. In fact, this is what happened here. So I did one strike on a fairly thick branch where I hit it hard, but I messed up the edge alignment. I was cursing myself immediately because I could feel it was going very wrong. So with bad edge alignment, if you deliver a hard cut, it will get stuck, and then all the force acts on it when it suddenly comes to a stop while the blade is being twisted, and that can cause a lot of problems, especially in this case, because this is such a wafer thin edge. So it did get deformed quite substantially. I fixed it since then, at least mostly. You can probably still see it around here. There's still a sign of deformation. Basically what I did is I put it on a flat, hard metal surface and took a ball peen hammer and hammered it to straighten it out, which is not great. You're not really supposed to cold hammer hardened and tempered steel, because that can weaken it and cause micro tears and fractures, and just will make the material more likely to fail in the future. But this is really the only thing I can do. I don't have the means of reheating the entire thing, forging it hot, and then heat treating and then tempering it again. That's too much. I can't do that. That's the only thing I can do aside from grinding it, which would mean losing a lot of material. Now the good thing is, they did get the tempering right. The problem would be if they made this edge here too hard, because if it's this thin and too hard, it just breaks. It just chips out. Deformation is fine, because that can be fixed. If this was all broken out, that's it, you're done. You can't add that material back in. I cannot fault the sword for it at all. I was being clumsy right there. And that is just the inherent compromise here that you're making. If you want to focus that much on the blade's cutting power and shape it to optimize that, it's not going to be quite as strong, because it's so thin. It's a price you have to pay for such cutting power. But considering what I did to it, it held up beautifully. And it could have been a lot worse. Like, this original here, for example. That's a serious gouge. That's another thing to keep in mind. The steel quality nowadays is so much better. In the 15th century, they had come a long way with metallurgy, but they wouldn't have been able to create steel of this purity and this hardness and toughness and all of that. And all of that comes at a price. Such an epic sword, you don't get for peanuts. Unless the peanuts are made of gold or diamond or something. And this is the other big issue here. This is the major hurdle for most people. 1430. $1,430 US. Do I think it's worth it for the quality you're getting, knowing the costs involved in reproducing swords and the general market? Oh yeah, I do think it's worth it. But that makes it very unavailable. In current times, even more so. So this means that most people will not be able to afford it. And I have to point that out, even though that's not a criticism as such, it's still a drawback, it's still a con, So even if the value for money is pretty good, that's still a huge pile of gold, basically, to put down. Now, these are generally not in stock. So typically you have to wait for about a year to get one. And Albion used to do layaway plans, payment plans where you just pay it off gradually. I don't know if they still do, but they might, so you can ask them. Kult of Athena might do that, I'm not sure. But if you have to wait for it for a year anyway, and then you pay it off monthly, then it's not as painful, and you can still get a sword like this. If you're able to, if you can afford it, yeah, absolutely, I would recommend. I mean, you can tell. Of course I would recommend it. I've been basically gushing about it. And I've been struggling to even come up with anything negative to say about it. The personal preference about the grip shape here, that's already the only thing. That and the price, and the fact that it doesn't come with a scabbard. That's really the only things I can think of. Otherwise, it performs so well. Fit and finish is so good. The handling is fantastic. The cutting performance is, beyond a doubt. And thrusting too, by the way. I did some tests on a piece of particle board soaked by rain and snow and all that. So pretty soft, softer than wood normally is, but still, of course, harder and tougher than flesh by far. But it seemed like a pretty decent target. And so thrusts through it, no problem. With this shape, you can imagine it thrusts quite well. Cutting into it, oh boy, it buried itself deeply. And yeah, it's a lot of fun to use. For practice, you have to keep in mind that it's very forgiving, like to the point where it'll make you get away with things that you couldn't otherwise. Even if your edge alignment is off to the point where other swords would get stuck in the tatami mat or bat the water bottle around, it's fine. This sword is just going to be like, I got you, bro. And it will cut through anyway. So it can be a little too forgiving if you want something to refine your cutting skill. With this sword, I was able to cut an empty water bottle. That's not something I normally try. It's very difficult because then you don't have that mass to support it. In other words, everything has to be perfect to not push the bottle away before you cut through it. And yeah, this did it. On a cut like that, you still have to do it well. You still have to have proper edge alignment. But yeah, this... Anyway, that's enough blah blah. I'm sure you get the point. This is an expensive but badass sword. And yeah, it is not my #1 favorite. I'll tell you that. And that's simply because of the grip shape. That's it. There's another one that has taken that spot recently. And I'll try to review that one next. We'll see how it goes, but yeah, you'll see soon enough. So, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed this review. And yeah, get off my deck now.